So your attention is becoming monopolized in such a way that it's becoming harder and harder to focus on what you want to focus on. Okay, and I want to get into a few different topics a few different perspectives in the way I believe that this is happening. It's happening in the physical sense, where you're becoming so restless and tired, you just kind of fall into your habits. And what is everyone's habits? It's scrolling on their phone. But also, I want to get into just casually scrolling on your phone, where there's not really a whole lot other to view. There's not a whole lot other things to view. I'm going to get into that. So there's not a whole lot to view. There's not a whole lot of substance in your everyday content that you're consuming as a consumer on all these different platforms, on Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube. And you're seeing more and more people flock away from like these more short-term based content like Instagram and TikTok, and you're seeing them flock more towards YouTube. Even though YouTube isn't really like, it's still not the best, right? It's still not the best, but in a way you do kind of get a little bit of control of your algorithm. You still do get a little bit of control of your algorithm. You get a sense of autonomy over your attention span, over your attention. Okay. Now, most people, including myself, I'm getting back from like a hard day's worth of work, and sometimes like the job isn't really even that hard, but it's tedious and repetitive in a way, but it sinks in just enough to keep your attention span for 8 hours, or sometimes even more if you're working overtime, right? But for me, like, I'm working like these shifts, right? I'm working these shifts, and I'm thinking to myself, man, like I can't wait to go home and work on physical exercise, to work on exerting myself in the gym and kind of bettering my body in that way. I can't wait to start creating more YouTube videos. I can't wait to meal prep. I have all these ideas while I'm at work, and just thinking to myself, like, man, I'm just gonna keep focusing on myself, and I'm gonna create and do what I want to do. But then you actually get home, and again, going back to like the workday might not even be super hard. It might actually even be an easy workday, but you still just feel exhausted. You still just feel exhausted because of the repetitiveness of it, or maybe even just the restlessness in the state that you're in right now. And because of that, you instantly resort to just scrolling on your phone, whatever it may be. Some people will say like, oh no, I read the news on my phone. I read the news articles, or sometimes I even read like the Bible or the books on my phone. But man, still, it's like you're still on your phone. You're still on your phone, and like the temptation's there. That's like saying like, oh yeah, I'm a recovering alcoholic, but I still go to the bar sometimes just to kind of check out the scene, just to kind of socialize and get to know people. I don't drink. I don't plan on drinking. Like, well, you might not plan on drinking. You might not plan on scrolling on your phone, but the temptation is there. You have to be willing to kind of drop it. You have to be willing to kind of to change. You got to be willing to heal. Excuse me. And I don't think a lot of people are willing to heal from that device right there. That's called your smartphone. That's called the social medias. Okay. And even when you are on social media, you still get pulled in. You still get reeled in by all these short form contents that are literally designed by the smartest psychologists, the smartest people in the entire world are designing these devices to be as addicting as possible. Okay, so not only, do you have to fight the work system in, trying to stay motivated after you get out of work, and you got to pretend like, you're really making a change. And believe me, I know countless people where they work really self-sacrificing jobs, and they still feel like they're not making a change in this world, because it's just it's called overproduction. Like, we don't need all of this, but for some reason we're being propagandized that we need all of this. Like, we need these phones, we need to work at these mega corporations that just monopolized their business by cutting corners and cutting the edges. And really, when they're cutting the corners and they're cutting the edges, that it hurts the quality. And it's been hurting the quality so much that you see all the foods over at Walmart, and even a lot of foods over at some better grocery stores like Whole Foods, where, man, they got a lot of chemicals, they got a lot of preservatives and stuff that was just never meant for humans to consume, that were never meant for anyone to consume. And surprise, surprise, when they're cutting all these corners and cutting all these edges, we're ingesting and we're consuming non-stop. We are just the consumer-based society. Then, yeah, in a sense, we're gonna get sick, because we got no other choice. This company monopolized everything. Finances are so tough right now. We're in such a sticky spot with our country right now that everyone is like one paycheck away from homelessness. That's like, yeah, we kind of have to, resort to these mega corporations that really don't have our best interest, that really could care less for anything other than money, for anything other than cutting corners in the right spots and in the right directions. I got a bug in my mouth, And yeah, that's kind of where our attention span has gotten. That's where our attention span is. We're just living in this restless lifestyle. We're living in this restless state to where we don't really have time to create something of our own. And we got nothing but time to consume. Okay, because we could think, well, consuming gives me temporary relief from this restless state that I'm living in. It's like you're tired in such a way that sleep can't heal. You're tired and exhausted in such a way that sleep can't help. And I think a lot of it has to do with consuming too much and not creating enough. And easier said than done, right? Like, there's a lot of these blue collar workers, a lot of these trade workers, hats off to them. And they're the backbone of society, of this overproduction society that pretends like we need all this stuff, that pretends that like houses, for example. I watched a video of houses and how, like, the wood, like all these trees that they're chopping down are being chopped down prematurely. Okay, and they aren't like aging enough to the point where the wood corrodes within like 4 or 5 years or something like that. Whereas the houses back then, they have the same exact wood, but the wood has aged. It's aged in a way where the houses withstand the test of time. I think the houses are a great example of everything that branches off from overproduction. It's like we're not giving them enough time to age. We're not giving, like the farmers, for example. I think this is also a huge reason why farmers went out of business. Okay, I think farmers went out of business is because everyone wanted to, everyone didn't mind at the time that these big mega corporations were cutting corners, and they pretended like they cared for you, and they pretended like they cared for you and your well-being. And then years down the line, you realize, man, they cut corners so much that they're poisoning us. They're poisoning us slowly. They're not giving us straight up poison to the point where we die upon eating one bite, but they're giving us just enough poison so that by the time that we do notice it, there's this huge tidal wave of poison that lies within us that we can't overcome. You're seeing this with especially the older generations now, where the older generations and the millennials, where they ingested so much poison from these big mega corporations that now they're finally reaping what they sowed, in a sense. They're finally seeing how everything prospered from everything cutting corners. And no one wants to support these farmers anymore because it's just too expensive, and everyone's one paycheck away from being homeless. I don't want to say everyone, but like a lot of people, let's be honest. So, and it's not only Gen Z and millennials, but I think the boomer class actually has the most homeless people out of any generation, from what I remember from when I looked it up. So yeah, I think that's all I want to talk about. Anyways, God bless.